The Boys Season 5 Episode 7 is easily one of the best episodes of this season, and with an ending that brought emotion and pain back as one of the main motivating factors to take down Homelander. This is definitely an episode to remember and the perfect way to set up the show's finale. Being titled The Frenchman, the Lady, and the Man Called Mother's Milk, we saw Frenchie, Kimiko, and MM's importance in changing the course of events in their own individual ways. Frenchie convinced Sister Sage to help him and showed that the unpredictability of love is a beautiful mystery of the world. Kimiko was the test subject and weapon, and Mother's Milk showed Starlight that in a world full of hate and suffering, doing something good within it isn't soft, it's hard as hell. I honestly can't believe the show only has one episode left, but here we are. So with that, I wanted to discuss the episode, explain that heartbreaking ending, and share what I thought of it. Here is The Boys Season 5 Episode 7 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Homelander. The journey of Homelander in this episode was all about showing us a couple of things. He was brandishing his power in completely new ways and letting the fact that he was immortal make him quite literally feel invincible. For example, he wanted to disband Congress and bring in new laws such as banning nut milk. It showed that he'd gone completely crazy, and instead of allowing democracy to exist, he essentially wanted to be a totalitarian dictator that ruled the country in his way. He spoke of a reckoning that was going to be occurring for all of those that were seen as the unfaithful, and we saw that reckoning beginning with him wanting to eradicate anybody that was seen as an unbeliever, such as the people that got the VIP treatment of Vought and had to give their feedback on the promo of him being handed the crown of thorns and unveiled as the new god. The omnipotent mindset and belief of himself was brought to the forefront instantaneously when he killed the president because Ashley told Homelander that Steven didn't believe that Homelander was truly the one true god. The wiping of the blood of his hands on the sofa and the lack of care and regard for what he'd just done showed that it all simply meant nothing to him. If people didn't believe in him, then his wrath was going to be unleashed onto them. There wasn't a place for heresy, and the country was only going to have people in it that believed in Homelander. What I found interesting about Homelander's arc was that even though he had immortality, was planning on being only left with people that believed in him. The conversation with Soldier Boy was arguably one of the most telling things about the fragility that still existed in Homelander's mind, and no V1 was going to help that. Soldier Boy didn't want to be on board this all-worship Homelander train and thought it was ridiculous. He didn't believe that Homelander was a god and he still thought that he was weird. However, the most detrimental thing that Soldier Boy said to his son was, "You're no god." Those three words caused a reaction in Homelander's face which showed that he said something that he couldn't come back from, and it cut him deep. When Homelander screamed, "I am God," it showed the insecurity that Homelander had and the desperation that he had in wanting people to believe that he was, and the frustration that Soldier Boy, the one soup that he's ever felt inferior to, and his own father didn't actually view him as one. Even though Homelander was getting the approval from the masses, he wanted true belief and for people to worship him out of love, not fear, something that has been present since the very beginning of the season. Even though he made sure that he was going to get that, with Soldier Boy planning on leaving, his father not believing and leaving him all on his own, it was his worst nightmare. Homelander's biggest fear is being unloved and being alone, and Soldier Boy walking out on him marked that very thing happening. Homelander essentially got what he wanted, which was immortality and immunity, but it cost him everything. Soldier Boy didn't want to be near him, Sage was a traitor, Noir was dead, Firecracker was dead, Ryan didn't want anything to do with him, and all he was left with was a useless Deep. An eternity of being alone is something that he most certainly doesn't want, but it's what he's been left with. Loneliness and being called a disappointment have plagued him since he was a child, and with Soldier Boy now planning on abandoning him, it was going to be happening all over again. What's the point in having success if you can't share it with anybody? That's why he ended up capturing Soldier Boy when his back was turned and putting him back into the cryo chamber. He said to Soldier Boy that he loved him, so even if he was frozen in his apartment, in Homelander's eyes, technically he wasn't going to be alone. Homelander had hired all of the most powerful psychic soups to be alongside him, such as Synapse, Grey Matter, and Psych KO, so that they could essentially work out if people were being truthful about being believers or not. This showed that Homelander truly didn't have a place for anybody in his world that didn't believe that he was a god and was falsely believing in him. This is essentially the reckoning that he spoke of, and now that he has it his way, the purge is going to truly begin. With Homelander finding out the location of Sage, he went to the location where Frenchie and Sage were working on replicating Soldier Boy's powers and planting them in Kimiko, and honestly, when he was there, this felt like the most menacing that we'd seen him all season. The arrogant nature that he had to say to Frenchie that they were simply trying to replicate Soldier Boy's power, and with Frenchie saying that they actually managed to do it, the smile that Homelander emitted was one that was actually laced with fear, and even though he was smiling, you could see it in his eyes that he knew that he was about to be faced with his own mortality again. It wasn't the virus this time, but it was the radiation. In an episode that was very much focused around love, the unpredictability of it, the beauty of it, and the power that it holds and what it truly brings, we saw it being exhibited throughout Frenchie, Butcher, Starlight, and Mother's Milk. But on the other side, we saw how Homelander had no love whatsoever, but a sheer desire to be loved. He's a person that's riddled with darkness, who's only ever wanted to be loved and has never actually had any, and that's why he's ended up exactly the way that he is. With him flying off at the end, I imagine his enraged mindset is going to begin purging anybody that's a non-believer until wants to exhibit his power and strength. I think this is actually going to end up making people turn against him, and his empire might actually begin to crumble at his own hands before it's really even been built. We even saw that ever so slightly with the Homelander supporters that were saved by Starlight when they saw that she wasn't the monster that he made her out to be. The most fun thing about Homelander over the years has been the journey into his mind, and this season has truly delivered on that. Frenchie's death. Oh man, I never thought an episode of The Boys would make me well up, but the ending to this one had me holding back the tears. During this episode, we saw that the boys were planning on essentially feeding Kimiko an atom bomb's worth of radiation, just like what happened to Soldier Boy all of those years ago, so that they could essentially replicate the power so that they could strip Homelander of Compound V. This was seeing as though they could no longer use the virus on him. It was taking its toll on Kimiko and she was struggling. However, because she had the self-healing ability, she was the only one that it would be able to work on. The moment that Frenchie said to Kimiko that after all of this is over, he wanted to get a place in Marseille and start a family with her, even showing her the exact dog that he wanted them to adopt, I knew that he'd be toast. There wasn't a chance that he was getting out after laying down the foundations for their future together. The love that Frenchie had for Kimiko, the very thing that was at the core of this episode, was what allowed the weapon to be built correctly, because he managed to convince Sage to snap out of her spiral over not being able to predict love, and it was also what enabled Kimiko and Sister Sage to be able to be saved. Frenchie hid Kimiko in a zinc-covered crawl space after hearing that Homelander had arrived, because that was a material that he couldn't see through, and honestly, his arrival was like a horror film. The sound of Homelander's footsteps in the distance, the shot of only his feet going up the stairs, and then when Frenchie tapped on the wall, the speed that Homelander traveled to right in front of him was utterly petrifying. Frenchie knew full well that his time was up, hence why he switched on the uranium. I love this moment because even though Frenchie was weakening, he saw that Homelander was also becoming weaker in there too. It didn't level the playing field, but it brought Homelander down just that little bit. When Frenchie said, "Look at you, I bet you never danced a day in your life," it really brought to light that Homelander had never had any fun in his life. He was always so serious and strung up on trying to be loved rather than just letting love happen. The smile that Homelander gave was dark because we knew at that moment that it wasn't going to end well for Frenchie. Love is a power in itself, and that's what we saw during the ending when Kimiko left the crawl space and ran over to Frenchie whilst he was laying there on the floor in his final moments. Kimiko said to Frenchie, "Thank you for saving us. Thank you for saving me." And Frenchie responded and said, "No, you saved me." This again brought the focus in on love being this beautiful thing. Frenchie's life was full of chaos, disruption, and he couldn't see a life with stability, but Kimiko showed him a kindness that nobody ever had and changed his life forever. She saved him in more ways than one, and it was such a powerful moment. The score was beautiful under this scene, but when it fell silent and Kimiko was cradling him and crying into him, saying, "Please don't leave me," we saw the other side of love, the side of heartbreak, pain, and the broken state that you can be left in when the person that you love leaves. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think I'd ever be upset at Frenchie dying, but the way that it was directed and the way that it played out was just so upsetting. With Butcher and Hughie also running back into the room, they saw that they were too late and there was nothing that could be done. This adds another personal element and desire to kill Homelander. He's taken another person that Butcher cared about. If love is the core theme, then it definitely seems like Kimiko's going to be used as the weapon on Homelander in the final episode. Butcher and Hughie. I'm actually really glad that we got an episode that had Butcher and Hughie together, because in the previous seasons it always felt like Hughie was Butcher's younger brother in this situation, and I liked that, but it sort of fell to the wayside with Butcher becoming more selfish. However, this brought it right back. With the both of them being captured by Synapse and him having a hold over Butcher so that he couldn't utilize his powers, he transformed into Kessler right in front of him, and Hughie was told how he was essentially the Kessler in this situation. The mission that they were on and the fact that Butcher's dark mind and desire to hit the target no matter what the cost was brought to light, and the fact that he was the sole survivor was brought to the forefront. Within this story, you could see the similarities where Homelander was the target that Butcher wanted, that'd get him no matter what the cost, even if he was the sole survivor. Up until this point, Hughie was annoying me because he was acting like a defeatist in a room full of people that were actually trying to do something about it. But with Synapse essentially turning into Kessler so that he could distract Butcher so he could get into his mind and find out the location of Sage and what the team's plan was. When Synapse returned to kill them, Hughie brought up the death of Synapse's brother and the responsibility that he held, which distracted his mind and enabled Butcher to gain control of his powers and break free, ultimately killing Synapse where he stood. For me, this part of the story was all about humanizing Butcher before the finale. We spent a large part of the show almost seeing Butcher as this anti-hero, one that had lost all of his humanity, but this episode was all about showing us that he still cared and that he'd almost returned to how he used to be. He cared about Hughie, he cared about defeating Homelander, and he wasn't now just going to be willing to allow the people that he cared about to be killed, all for the target, like what happened with Kessler. So I liked that we got that intimate time with Butcher and Hughie. The Deep. Now, I thought the Deep was just going to do a runner, but he actually confessed to Homelander what he did to Black Noir, which did surprise me. With Homelander disbanding the Seven and no longer wanting the Deep to have anything to do with him, even though the Deep had been loyal to him and had cost him pretty much everything and everybody. When the Deep left, we saw him truly feeling lost in the world. He had no sense of belonging on land because everything he'd ever done had been for Homelander, and this is why he turned to the sea. However, when he turned to the sea, Xander the Shark basically told the Deep that if he ever went into the water again, the sea life would make sure that the Deep paid for the 1.4 billion fish that were killed by the oil pipeline that he endorsed on the 15th of March. Even though it wasn't him that caused the leak, the fact that he endorsed it and went against the species that he was supposed to care about most was something that they couldn't forgive. So the Deep wasn't safe in the sea either. This showed how he truly had no sense of belonging anymore and how he was a lost soul without a purpose. There was a man that was struggling in the sea and the Deep refused to go into the water to save him. This was captured on video by somebody that was on the beach, and I feel like this is going to come back to haunt the Deep. The Deep has spent his life being devoted to Vought, the Seven, and Homelander, and now that Homelander has disbanded the Seven, he's been tossed to the wayside and left on his own. I originally thought that the Deep would be killed by the sea life, and personally, I do think that will still be the case. It's just about how he's going to end up back in the water. Unlike A-Train, the Deep is a truly irredeemable character that never once went to the right side of the moral fence, and now he's paying the ultimate price for it. Starlight and Mother's Milk. With Homelander running a survey on some of his loyal followers for a promo that was going to be pushed out about him being announced as God, the Psychic Soups were there to see what they truly felt and if they were lying on the survey. As O-Father told Homelander, only 6 out of 30 were true believers, which made Homelander want the non-believers to be killed, even if they were following him. This marked a turning point because it showed that Homelander didn't just want support, he wanted true support and was willing to slaughter people that were on his side but weren't going to accept him as a god. Marie and Jordan appeared in this episode as they shared intel about O-Father spending time at Vought Studios, but Starlight essentially told them that their work was done and that there was simply nothing that they could do about it. Starlight didn't see the point in Marie having the powers that she had, considering that she couldn't control them properly. This was what essentially sparked the conversation between Starlight and Mother's Milk about not only the origin of Mother's Milk's name, which was because he cared for a wounded pigeon and got it back to full health, but it also shone a light on the importance of trying to save people that don't think they need to be saved, and that doing something good in a world that's full of darkness, even though it might be an uphill battle and be perceived as something that's soft and a waste of time, it's not. It's tough and hard and actually needed. Mother's Milk actually convinced Starlight to change her mind, and with Dognot and Sheline wiping out some of the people in the screening room, they burst in and saved the people by killing them. What I liked about Starlight's arc in this episode was that we saw that she not only saved the people that didn't initially feel like they needed saving, but she also convinced them that she was good and exposed them to the truth about Homelander. Starlight got a thank you from a Homelander supporter, which showed that people can change and can be saved even if they feel like they don't need it. We also saw Mother's Milk addressing the change that he underwent this season. With all of the talk of him potentially turning into a dark soul like Butcher, he reminded himself that he actually wasn't a dark soul. It was just for a brief moment whilst in the internment camp where he lost his heart and just became a ruthless individual. But now he cares and wants to make the world a better place again. My review of the episode. I thought this was hands down the best episode of the season. Penultimate episodes in shows always find a way of delivering, and this one followed suit with that. There was just constant tension from the moment that it started, and I just didn't want it to finish. For me, the most frightening part of this episode was Homelander's smile that he made towards Frenchie just before killing him. There was something about it which just felt so patronizing, where even though Homelander was getting weaker because of the uranium, he was going to prove to Frenchie that he was still stronger than him. It was really haunting. When it came to the cameos from Marie and Jordan, I thought they were pretty pointless, to be honest. I don't feel like they were needed, and when Mother's Milk called Marie as strong as Homelander, it just felt like a bit of an awkward conversation because we've seen Homelander and we've seen her, and it's just not. I get she can't control her powers perfectly, but after seeing Homelander all season and then seeing Marie, it's just levels. Like I've said all season, I hope they don't have that strong of an involvement, and I don't think they will now, which I'm quite glad about. Frenchie's death is probably up there with one of the saddest moments in the entire show. I just thought the scene was directed so well. It drew us all in. We had the build-up with Frenchie wanting to build a life, him talking about love, a future, and then we saw it all come crumbling down within minutes. The pain in Kimiko was what helped make the scene what it was as well. I do find it odd that they've been so on and off this season though. I feel like that did take just something away from it. Within this episode, I feel like we got some peak Butcher moments as well. Moments that just reminded me of how he used to be during the earlier seasons of the show. He had his comedic lines, his blasé attitude, but we also saw him absolutely owning people, which I loved. It's nice to get this Butcher back right towards the ending. Hughie did annoy me slightly with his defeatist mindset in this episode. He was the only person that was walking around and saying, "We've lost," and I just found it a bit weak. So that was something that I was rolling my eyes at. The opening scene with Oh Father doing the musical number about Homelander was honestly perfect. It made sense to get Oh Father singing because of the actor's connection to Hamilton, but not only that, the song was super catchy. The deep storyline is something that I have actually really enjoyed this season. Seeing him navigating a space that has no direction and now seeing him being abandoned feels quite fitting for the character. I just have no idea how his story's going to end, and that's what makes it feel even more intriguing. With the way that this episode concluded, there's a hell of a lot to do in the final episode, but I don't doubt that it's going to be a good one. Everything is now at stake. Homelander knows that there's a weapon coming for him, and there's nothing he can do about it. Honestly, I'm preparing for a total bloodbath, and I can't wait to see how the show's going to end. The emotions are there, the story is still there, and next week, I'll be there too. So, there you have it, The Boys Season 5 Episode 7 Ending Explained.